Welcome to Utopian Horizons.
Hello and welcome to Utopian Horizons, a podcast where I cover a different utopia, dystopia, utopian thinker or movement in each episode. This episode is about a video game called Bloodborne that was developed by From Software and released in 2015. We say 2014 during the episode because both of us can't remember, but that was incorrect. It was 2015. If you don't know anything about Bloodborne, don't worry, we'll introduce that when I get to the conversation with my guest. But it was a good opportunity to kind of take a perspective on Utopia, which I haven't taken before. My guest on the podcast is Rosie from the Diane podcast and the Shadow Trap podcast. Again, I won't explain what those are now because we do that in the conversation, but just to say that they're both really fantastic. I listened to both of them and I'd really recommend you give them a try. But anyway, Rosie has a background studying anthropology and in particular studying religion. And as you'll be aware, if you listen to this podcast, the approach I primarily take to Utopia is a secular one. I think it's primarily employed as a secular idea, nowadays at least. But yeah, Utopia can obviously also be approached with some kind of religious dimension, or we can say there could be utopian aspects to religion in terms of both in theology, I guess, but also in terms of the structure of religious communities and so on. So yeah, it was a nice opportunity to take a look at Utopia from a direction that I don't think I've really covered it before. So yes, Bloodborne as a game, which as we'll get into, is very much about the church in terms of its plot and is concerned with kind of gods and higher planes and all this type of stuff. Was a really nice opportunity to talk about some of this stuff. So yeah, I'll be back at the end to tell you about some other bits and pieces. But for now, I'll just leave you with my conversation with Rosie. Joining me now is Rosie from the Diane podcast and the Shadow Trap podcast. Thank you very much for coming on, Rosie.
Thank you very much for having me. Hello.
Before we get on to talking about our topic today, which is Bloodborne, did you briefly want to sort of explain to people what Diane and the Shadow Trap are?
Oh, sure, yeah. So I've got, two podcasts, as you say. Diane, which is on somewhat of a hiatus at the moment, but maybe back more regularly soon, which is a podcast about Twin Peaks. And I've also got a show, The Shadow Trap, where me and my co-host talk about monsters from a kind of cultural, symbolic perspective. So we've got a show that should be out, I think, by the time this goes up, about the Minotaur.
I'd really recommend checking both those out. I listened to both of them and they're really intelligent and fun and they're really great. So I'd recommend checking them out. But as I said, we are talking today about Bloodborne. And yeah, I thought it was interesting. You said you kind of pointed out to me when we were talking about you coming on that it tends to be even on this podcast when we talk about Utopia, it tends to be kind of a secular vision that we're talking about.
Yeah, I found that really interesting. My knowledge of sort of utopian texts is certainly not massively extensive, but I was aware of Utopia having some roots in, the work of Thomas More, obviously. Mm. And, to say that Thomas More was a religious man would be rather understating the case. He's a fervent believer, died for his version of Christianity. So it was interesting to me that Utopia, which seems to be a sphere of discourse about how we might improve the world, which seems to me to have so much to do with theology, or to share so much ground, I suppose, with theology, that we're often discussing actually very secular visions.
Yeah, it's certainly true that religion's something I've barely given to consideration to on the podcast. I touched on it very, very briefly in a Patreon episode on Utopia and music, and I was kind of talking about this idea of Utopia. So religion obviously has a utopian aspect, which can sometimes be, I would describe, anti-utopian in the sense of heaven being a thing that comes later. You know what I mean? So you just kind of accept how things are now and like live by the rules, and then you get utopia later.
In the next life.
Yeah, which is kind of to me an anti-utopian idea, because it's like, not creating anything here. But as you say, in terms of when you think about religious communities, and when you think of the strong role that religion's played, for example, in like the civil rights movement in America, there can be a very utopian aspect to religion. And I think you're right that that's something that doesn't really come up a lot when people talk about utopia.
Yeah, I mean, I think there may be some actual sort of cultural reasoning for this. I think a lot of the time, I think it seems to me that we're dealing with texts, science fiction texts, for instance, that are coming out of a cultural context where Protestantism is the background. And the thing with Protestantism is that it renders religion very much a kind of private affair. Protestantism says, you read a book and you agree with the book, and then you kind of have belief in your heart. And it's something that you can do very privately. It doesn't really need to enter the public sphere. And from this, we get kind of ideas about the secular realm, the realm of politics, and interestingly to me as well, the realm of science as spheres in which God is particularly absent, particularly evacuated. And so obviously on a show like this, perhaps where we're discussing visions of utopia, it makes sense that we're talking about movements that are rooted in politics a lot of the time, or, science fiction, that these would be spheres in which you have alternative ways of imagining the future that don't involve or don't require, or maybe in which God isn't even particularly welcome.
Yeah.
It sort of makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If you think of, I would say, utopian thinking as being like necessarily about community, and that you're thinking about, you're thinking about the condition of the society. If you're thinking in utopian terms, then as you say, if your religion is something that you think of in private terms rather than in terms of community, then it makes sense that it's not going to come out of that. I wanted to briefly ask you as well, because you have a background studying religion, right?
I do, yeah. So I did my PhD research. It was a few years ago now. I was doing my research around sort of 2010 kind of time. Finished up, I think, 2013. I have a background in the anthropology of religion. And I did my sort of fieldwork research, which you sort of always do for about a year when you're an anthropology student. I did that with evangelical, what we describe as charismatic Christians. So those are forms of Christianity that are actually growing as a subset of global Christianity. I believe it's probably still the fastest growing form of Christianity in the world. And those are Christians who, broadly speaking, you're talking about people who are quite politically conservative, who put a great stress on reading and studying the Bible, who really emphasise the need for a personal relationship with God. But perhaps like most eye-catchingly and distinctively, for many of us, these are also Christians who pray in tongues, who believe in healing through the laying on of hands, forms of prophecy, things that we would see as sort of supernatural. So I worked with those kinds of Christian churches in the UK.
Okay. Would you think of them as having like a utopian component to their thinking, or not?
Absolutely. Yeah, really, really strongly. Christians talk about themselves as... The Christians I work with would describe themselves as born again. That's a really important marker. And the idea is that you have a new life when you get saved, when Jesus comes into your heart, into your life. And as a result, you are able to build more authentic connections with people, more authentic communities. And the people that I worked with really considered it very important that their churches, the congregations that they were part of, reflected in some way a coming kingdom, a better world that was just around the corner. And for them, particularly in charismatic movements, that's a form of Christianity in which it's not just something that's going to happen in the next life. It is something that you expect to happen kind of quite soon, basically, in the here and now. A lot of them are sort of millennialist. They believe the end times are coming. They're just around the corner. Jesus is coming back and the world is going to be completely transformed. But in the meantime, to get a sense of how it might look, you should be able to look at the charismatic or the congregation, the church, and hopefully that will give you a little taste of what heaven is going to be like.
So do they tend to think those that kind of brand of Christianity you're talking about? Do they tend to think of Utopia as something that's going to be delivered by God, or is there a kind of idea that they should be like themselves working to kind of create a better world?
Yeah, I mean that's certainly a question. The extent to which individual believers have a responsibility for improving a world that, as you say, that there's very much a feeling that believers can't do a lot. You can't really you can't do anything without God, is something that a lot of people would say. However, they did think that once God had come to live within you, once you were born again, you certainly could improve the world, and that there was some degree of responsibility to do so. When I was doing my research, one of the churches that I was working with, for instance, had it was the wife of one of the pastors was quite involved in politics, and they're around the Centre for Social Justice, which was Ian Duncan Smith's kind of group. I'm not sure if they're still going, but she was quite involved in that, and there was a real excitement about that, a real sense that, oh, wonderful, this is really important cultural work. We're really gonna get in there and make society more Christian in some way, that kind of work, or engaging with sort of community work, sort of just much more locally, was seen as being quite important. Good work, good practice to be getting on with.
Yeah, Ian Duncan Smith's certainly the perfect person to go to if you care about social justice.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's not exactly to my taste, but yeah, that was very much the movement. I mean, a lot of the time, people would be sort of necessarily, where they were involved with politics, would be much more right-wing politics than my own. Again, these are fairly conservative people a lot of the time. Yeah,
sure. Okay, so as I said, we are talking about Bloodborne today. So I think, I don't know, that lots of people that listen to this podcast play video games anyway, but I don't know if they all do, and I'd like this to be, accessible for people who don't know the medium in detail. So I thought it might be useful if we just could introduce the game a bit. So could you kind of explain a bit to people about what Bloodborne is?
Yeah, sure. So Bloodborne is a game that was released, I've just realised I didn't look up the date. I think it was 2014, but I could be wrong about that.
That sounds right.
Okay, 2014 or possibly 15. And it's a Japanese game. It comes from a studio called From Software. From Software have only sort of been releasing games that have been very popular for around the last under 10 years, really, but they've had this absolutely huge impact. They are known for a particular style of game that is difficult, is one of the first things that people would say. Set in mysterious worlds where you go around battling monsters, getting stronger, and finding out more about what happened in a vision of a world that is always sort of distinctly post-disaster, I think is the term that you would probably use, kind of distinctly dystopian.
And like you say, the difficulty things it's the idea is, and this is something that people always say, you start playing the game, it seems impossible at first, and then it's a game that is unusually, although this has become quite popular now, but like Dark Souls is the game that kind of popularized this idea. I think there was a tendency before Dark Souls for games to be the idea that if you failed in some way, like it was a game design problem. It's kind of a fashionable idea that Dark Souls has changed, I think. But yeah, you will quite often come up against things that seem possible and impossible, and through like repetition, you gradually come to comprehend like how the abilities that like the enemies you're fighting against have, and how you use the space and what have you, and then suddenly you realise that you can do it, and it's a kind of, then you get to the next bit, and it's kind of that like cycle, right?
Absolutely, and it's really exciting when you're playing these games. It's really interesting talking about it when I was thinking about it in relation to kind of the people I worked with, sort of born again Christians. One thing that you would always have within those forms of Christianity, everyone has a kind of testimony of how sort of God came into their lives and improved it. And the weird thing with From Software with the Dark Souls games is a lot of people will tell similar kinds of stories about Dark Souls, maybe not with the same kind of cosmic soul-defining ramifications, but certainly the idea, I picked up this game and it made me better in some way is really, really, you see it incredibly widespread. So many think pieces, YouTubers will tell these kinds of stories about these games, that they improve your sense of self-efficacy and being able to take on challenges, because when you do face these games that are considered to be very, very difficult and find that you can do them, it's a wonderful feeling.
Yeah. People will talk about like life lessons that they've got from it and all of that. Yeah, I've seen a lot of that stuff as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw the actor Peter Serafinowicz saying that these games make you a better person, and it feels like quite an extreme claim for a game, but I think lots of us have had that kind of experience where it really did sort of change our feeling about video games in general, if not totally ourselves.
It does have it has an unusually like this. It's kind of hard to describe if you haven't experienced it, but this thing of like getting to a particular boss and just how impossible it was before, and by the end just the way you breeze through to the boss and you finally, after however many attempts, you beat it. It makes you feel incredible. It's like very
it's exactly that. It's that feeling that so often video games seem to promise, which is you're going to become so much more powerful, it's going to be amazing as you play this game. And in fact, what happens is you get stronger guns and, your abilities get the numbers that kind of go into your attack rolling and stuff like that. You actually just sort of get better on paper. And so you're stronger and you deliver more damage. Whereas with the Souls games, you actually do get better, which is, a wonderful feeling.
Yeah, sure. So this world that Bloodborne's set in, I would describe it as kind of gothic, Lovecraft-inspired world. Is that fair?
I think so, yes.
So big spires, dark, gothic architecture.
Yeah, I loved all that. I mean, I was thinking, I learned a little bit I was looking a bit into the Gothic recently, and the fact that Gothic architecture has that kind of makes those kinds of appeal to religious architecture. But for instance, our Houses of Parliament in the UK are sort of a famous example of Gothic architecture. And it was an attempt to sort of re-infuse the sort of more secular realm with with a religious aesthetic. You see that everywhere in Bloodborne.
I think you said to me that the whole Yharnam, which is the city that Bloodborne's set in, you said that everything looks like a church.
Yes.
I think that's true. Something else we should say about the game in terms of its style is it's very, very opaque, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's actually kind of a really important sort of aesthetic choice that is made by From Software in all the games. There's a really famous story that gets told about the guy who's sort of credited as the most important lead on these games, Hidetaka Miyazaki. He tells a story from his childhood that he would go to libraries as a kid, look at books of fantasy and, books about sorcery and stuff like that. They were often in English, but he couldn't really read English particularly well. He couldn't understand these books. So he would piece together the little bits of the text he could make out and look at the pictures and imagine for himself what might have happened in this story, what might have happened to this world. And it's that kind of experience that he has said he's trying to sort of recapture or create for people in the Souls games. And certainly Bloodborne is a wonderful example of this. It is opaque. We don't really understand what's taken place. It seems like it wasn't anything very good because the world has completely fallen apart.
So that's something to bear in mind when we're trying to talk about the story aspects.
Yes.
Because it's really... it doesn't have a narrative in the sense of the way a lot of games do. A lot of stuff is left very open to interpretation. A lot of stuff's based on little details you might find here and there. It's very vague in terms of goals, like it's not like other games that might set you up at the beginning. You are this character. Here is what you need to do, and here's why you want to do it. It's not really explicit what you're doing and why. A lot of the systems the game has are not explained to you. It doesn't have a long tutorial explaining to you, press this button to do this, and here's your menu, and this is all stuff you just kind of have to find out yourself, really. Yeah,
no, absolutely. You just sort of wake up and it's like, well, here you are in this mad, terrifying city. Have at it.
Yeah, so the beginning of the game is I believe it tells you at least you're a foreigner who's come to Yharnam, which is the city. You are receiving a treatment, like a blood transfusion,
basically
blood healing, and then you wake up and there's monsters, and that's kind of it. Like the first time you die, which you will die very quickly, you end up in a place called the Hunter's Dream, which is like a nowhere place. Like we don't really know where this is supposed to be, and you kind of have a guide there. Again, doesn't really tell you anything, but there's dream space, and then you go back into the world and start finding monsters, and that's really it for the beginning. You don't really know why you're doing this, but you just progress to find out. So that's a very rough introduction to it.
Yeah.
So the first thing I wanted to talk about was, so I've covered a lot of dystopias on the podcast, but in terms of something that creates an actual feeling of dystopia, I think this is something that this game does really well, and that video games have the potential to do really well.
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing with video games is being put in an environment. I always find it's like the really thrilling thing, going somewhere that you can explore, because you can be surrounded by, by the world, by buildings, by inhabitants, by noise, and kind of allow it all to sort of flow over you. And certainly Bloodborne establishes this really strong sense of place that I think is really important, because it did occur to me that when you're talking about dystopia or utopian fiction, you're talking about texts within which the lands, the setting, I guess, is really the kind of main character. And that's really very much the case in Bloodborne.
Yeah. And I presume you feel the same way as me on this. It's a very kind of unpleasant place to inhabit a lot of the time. It's, again, hard to articulate unless you actually play the game. There's a real feeling of the place being like hostile. And this partly ties back to what we said about how opaque it is and the fact that there's so much unknown there. But you really feel unsafe, and you really, there's these like horrible noises you can hear kind of in the distance that you don't know what it is. And, the difficulty talks about plays into this as well, this lack of safety. But it really, makes you feel the dystopia and give you that sense of this is a place that's, gone to hell.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think it's, you just hear kind of a lot of the time just awful sort of screaming going on behind doors. Everyone you meet is mad and sort of cackling away to themselves. The statues, I love the statues in Yharnam. When you walk around and you're like, oh, they obviously had a bit of money in this place. There's, sort of intricate railings everywhere and sort of carriages, and it's very grand in a lot of respect. And there are statues just everywhere. But the statues themselves are like people who look like they're sort of wretches, kind of beseeching upwards in these kind of poses of supplication and suffering. There's something, clearly there's been a recent disaster that's happened, but it seems like even when the city was very wealthy, and they were building all these statues, there was something very rotten and sick going on, because nothing is upbeat. Everything is just smacks of absolute desperation the whole time. Yeah,
it feels like the point that you're at was like the natural conclusion for this place. Yes. Yeah. And I thought there's something that just really jumped out to me again, going back to like other stuff I've covered, like I've covered a lot of cyberpunk, and this really made me think of the way like dystopias are often like cool,
right?
And like, in cyberpunk, the degradation and the decay of the place is often like romanticized to a degree. So yeah, a lot of dystopias don't. While they are on the surface dystopia, the way they're presented it's something for you to like enjoy, or it's kind of like a tourist destination in a way, if you see what I mean. For whereas this is not, like you said, it is a beautiful place still. It doesn't lose that. It still manages to be beautiful, but it's not a fun place to be. It's not a pleasant place to inhabit.
No, there's absolutely no feeling of, oh yeah, this is a cool place to visit, or or the people who live here might be cool or having interesting, exciting adventures. No one's having exciting adventers or a fun time in Yharnam. That's completely out of the question.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to try and do something quite difficult now.
Okay.
Which is, could you try and explain a bit about Bloodborne's story? We've given a very, very, very rough introduction to the how it sets you up, but could you try and give us a bit more detail of what Bloodborne is about?
Yeah, sure. What a challenge. This, I should say, I'm sort of piecing together from the great thing about these games, which are, as we've said, quite obscure, is that they have this incredibly active lore community where people on the internet sort of exchange theories about what on earth happened. So I'm sort of piecing it together from those secondary sources. But yes, it seems like what happened. There's a university near the city of Yharnam. Scholars who were working at that university were excavating ruins underneath the city, and they found something. It's referred to as a holy medium. At other points, it's referred to as a god. They found something, and it seemed to them that what they found could be used to push humanity forward in some way. It could be something that could bring about a new dawn of wonder and splendour. There was a disagreement in the university community about how to do this, how to approach this body of a god. Some people thought, okay, we need to try to be more like the gods. We need to change our minds to resemble them better. The process by which you do that is difficult to understand, but it seemed to be something to do with sort of covering yourself with eyes. Again, vague, difficult to understand. What you can understand seems quite gross. The other school, faction within the school, was no, we just drink the blood. We consume the blood, and then we have communion with the old gods. And that faction became the powerful faction. They eventually won over, and they found the healing church, which promises healing for all the inhabitants of Yharnam and the wider world if you undertake these blood transfusions, which, as you said, was the sort of first thing our character did on arriving in town. But you sort of discover that consuming this blood carries terrible, terrible risks and dangers, and it seems to have unleashed a curse on the whole town.
Yeah, hence all these like monsters and humans / like kind of people that look like they're in the midst of turning into a werewolf kind of thing. Yeah. That was a good explanation. I wouldn't have liked to try that. So I think what's interesting about that is it seems that what this is kind of about, or one thing I can read it's been about, is yes, it's really, when we think about Utopia, we tend to think about the society, like what are the institutions, how do the rules function, etc., etc. This is about shifting it to being about like transforming yourself or like evolving humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting to me that was that all the scholars at this university at Bergenworth were instantly filled with the need, oh, well, we can do something wonderful with this. We can all evolve as a race. It's an interesting thing to go to as your first kind of point of contact with these horrible old monsters. But yes, certainly it seems like it was able to transform Yharnam in the short term, because the healing church became tremendously powerful and wealthy because the blood did heal people from everything we can tell. But behind that, so Yana becomes very rich and powerful. But behind that certainly is this primary concern, which is to do with ascending to some kind of different plane. And really, I think it's really interesting, this idea of utopia is a sort of more spiritual and infused idea of utopia, an idea that, okay, we're all going to become closer to God. And then, by doing this, the world is going to somehow improve. This wonderful perverse impulse that you get within Lovecraft's work that then obviously is carried forth in Bloodborne. It's like, okay, fine, let's say everyone was communing with God. And then you finally get there. And what you get is not like this enlightened population who are all going to be able to relate to one another in a better way. And, you're going to build a stronger, loving world to die in, etc. What you're actually going to get is tentacles sprouting from your head and everyone thinking in several dimensions and not even being able to talk to one another anymore. And, just completely changing consciousness might not actually be the best idea to get us to utopia. And I just enjoy the perversity of that take on transforming society through mass enlightenment.
It does raise that question, though, of whether you need... So, that I wouldn't take this position, but, there's still a lot of people who will see society, the problems with society as being like one of fundamental, like almost a character trait. Like people in poverty, they think of poverty as being a bad character trait, like it's people's fault. So it does tap into this debate or question of to what extent you need to kind of transform people before you can transform society.
Yeah.
Or whether you need to kind of, in a sense, do you need to create a new humanity to get to utopia?
Yeah, does everyone need to be sort of being the change that they want to see in the world before that change kind of comes about?
Yes.
I agree with you. I wouldn't tend to agree with that. My own background is I grew up in a sort of human potential movement. My parents were members of a school of meditation, follow a guru, very involved in kind of new age culture. And you see that tendency within that culture in the same way that you see it within sort of religious cultures and conservative Christianity. That idea, if you want better conditions, you need to be better. And I think there's a real sort of cruelty underlying that. In some ways, I think, and it's also not particularly realistic for most people, and I think that's worth bearing in mind. A lot of the time when you're in Western context studying evangelical Christianity, or indeed if you were to do a study on New Ages in Western context, you're dealing with people who already have a great deal of freedom to spend hours and hours in prayer or meditation, or devote their whole lives to motherhood, or do whatever it is that they think will give them the most spiritual satisfaction and lead them to be the most effective kinds of forms of themselves who can create a better world for others. You need a certain degree of material comfort and spare time in order for that even to be a possibility. So you're just not talking about something that's tremendously realistic. You would need, I think, to obviously make changes in people's material conditions before people have time to pursue these kinds of loftier spiritual goals.
Something I find, whether this is a good thing or a bad thing is another question, but certainly that idea of evolution of like humanity or people is something that's lost in Utopia now. And again, I'm not saying that's bad or good, I don't know, but it's interesting to me that that's something that did used to exist very, very strongly and can manifest in very different ways. That could manifest in, for example, eugenics. But obviously it also makes me think of like the 60s and, the hippie movement and, the whole idea of like transforming your consciousness. Timothy Leary, like, he was big on, you take LSD and like do all these things to expand your consciousness, and then you can like become like that. For them, that was the way to transforming society. But yeah, to me, that kind of, eugenics obviously bad. The Leary stuff perhaps not so obviously harmful, but to me can be quite kind of just taps into what you were saying about requiring some material comfort before you can dive into the stuff. It tends to be a little bit self-obsessed, I think.
I think it can be. Yeah, I think if you spend an awful lot of time doing internal work, and trying to evolve your consciousness and stuff like that. Like, you can do that, and hopefully it brings you some better sense of happiness and well-being. But, where do you stop? You can always journey deeper inside yourself, but I'm not sure how much the payoff is in terms of improving the wider world for everyone. I think it can be quite self-absorbed.
That's something that's maybe in the game, intentionally or not, in terms of the... we've talked about this already, the sense of the kind of rush you get when you defeat a powerful enemy, and then that means you get loads of blood echoes, which is kind of the game's currency, I should say, which you can use to become more powerful. So then you kind of get very absorbed in that loop of, making yourself more and more powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And that just becomes the whole driving thing, and then as soon as you go back to the hunter's dream, you get more powerful, because that's that sort of alternative realm you were talking about, is where you go to improve yourself and your weapons and stuff. And then all you can think about is getting back out there, killing some more beasts. And I think some characters in the game will sort of suggest that to you, that they're a bit like, I think there's a hunter called Jura, for instance, who you bump into, who says this kind of thing, that you just sort of came here for sort of medical treatment, and now you've woken up, and it seems as you go further and get stronger, all you think about is going further and getting more strong. And what are you even doing in this city, really? You didn't really know, but suddenly your mission is all just about becoming as powerful as possible.
Well, there's that's, I think, they talk about, it's one of the item descriptions. It says, maybe it's not, I don't know, or it's in the loading screen or something. It says about people don't tend to drink much alcohol in Yharnam because blood is far more intoxicating. So it's in the idea of the game, this idea of it being like intoxicating, and you being kind of drawn into that. Absolutely.
And then obviously, like, the more blood you drink, the implication in the story as you sort of learn more and more about the world is, it's the blood that creates these monsters in the first place. And I guess the idea is maybe you're going down that route yourself.
So I wanted to ask you what comes to mind, or what you think Bloodborne might have to say perhaps about institutions or systems, because as we've already said, this whole thing of blood healing that the story is about, it's intimately tied to the power of the church. So we have an institution that effectively administers this utopia in terms of, where everything can be magically cured and so on and so forth. So just wondered what kind of thoughts you had on that.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting when you mentioned that in notes while we were discussing it before recording, because I was thinking about all of a sudden, healing, of course. In religious movements, healing is one of the first things that you'll see being made appeals to, in terms of, you come, you join us, you're going to enter into a better world. And the way that you know it's going to be better is that you're going to be healed. So the form of Christianity that I worked in, charismatic Christianity, is greatly distinguished by a focus on spiritual healing, on people. You may have seen, or you may be familiar with, the idea of people healing through laying on hands, praying over you, putting their hands on you and praying for healing. That's very much a practice that takes place, and also delivering testimonies of healing. So when that form of healing has been effective, you then have a story that has tremendous currency. You can go around different congregations and tell this story, and people are really keen to hear it. This is a very exciting sphere of practice for these Christians. And likewise, with my own background in New Age culture, healing there comes up so strongly. The idea of alternative medicines. Nearly everyone my parents hung out with would be engaged in some kind of other system of healing. Everyone was skeptical of what you'd call Western medicine, with kind of scare quotes around it. The idea we can do better than this when it comes to healing, I think, is a tremendously, tremendously powerful call to people's most basic desires. So it's a really effective way to get people on board with a movement. And as we see with the Healing Church in Yharnam, this is the institution that ushers in and draws people into this new reality that's being created.
I think that's very, very true. And again, this is something you said before we did the podcast, but you pointed out that even in like mainstream politics today, the idea of building a better system of healing is really important. I think that's so, like, when you think about the kind of intense defensiveness that British people have of the National Health Service, it's really kind of, I can't think of another institution like it that people kind of hold so dear and protect so much. And it's been like the most resistant to, it's been a real problem for, conservatives to, because in terms of their conservative ideology, they don't really like the NHS, but it's been difficult for them to say that. They, of course, like to privatise it like they have everything else. And they have had some success doing that, but they have to be very careful about doing it because it's so intensely protected. So yeah, I think that's the level at which it's managed to endure, what an inconvenience it is for the conservative element in Britain.
Yeah.
And globally as well, because it's very, of course, even in America, when people are trying to make arguments for socialised health systems, the NHS is a very inconvenient thing to exist because it demonstrates how that can work. And of course, they like to say it doesn't.
Absolutely. I mean, and it makes sense that healing is this kind of thing because it's core to... you want to talk about things that are core to the constitution of the self. Well, literally the place where we get bandaged up when we're sick. That's about as core as it can possibly get. So yeah, it's tremendously powerful symbolic realm, really, that we can think about in these terms as this just insanely significant sphere of sort of cultural thinking,
and core to like the idea of utopia as well. Even if you go back to if you go back to its more I suppose I would say like fantastical aspects of it. I'm thinking of less what I would call utopia, but like paradises, it's like you never get sick, everything's provided for. And then onto what I would describe as actual utopias. Health is always going to be a key factor of that. So yeah, I think that's very true. So one of the other very significant parts of this, in terms of the whole healing church thing and the blood and these potential gods or great ones they talk about, is children. Like, I'm not quite sure what it's about. Again, very vague. It's mentioned a lot, or it's mentioned in various places that the great ones lose their children and that they yearn for a surrogate, I think is a phrase that's used somewhere. So yeah, I don't particularly know what it's about, but I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, what it's about in terms of the sort of game story, as you say, relatively vague. It seems to be the case that perhaps children are being used within Yharnam itself to generate more blood for the healing church. But why the great ones themselves would be interested in children is kept obscure, I think, to some extent. Or if it's not, I don't understand it either. I thought this was interesting because I was thinking a little bit about, okay, what are other sort of dystopian texts I'm familiar with? Well, I mean, I guess there's 1984. I guess that's a touch point for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And I know there's BioShock as well, and you've covered a later BioShock game, haven't you? BioShock Infinite. But in the earlier BioShock games, the way that children are brought into this version of dystopia, they literally become sort of fodder for the system. The system kind of takes them over and they become the thing that generates the plasmids on which the society is running. So yeah, I was just interested to think about that, really. And I don't know if that's the case more broadly in dystopian fiction, where sort of children are sort of possessed by this terrible system.
I think you're right to identify. BioShock's a really good example where you say like the little sisters are kind of literally the people that administer the system and allow it to function. Yeah. Again, through taking blood, actually. There's certainly an idea that, I mean, we always think about how important it is for our ideology to be accepted by children, if you know them, because they are there's nothing worse than seeing like a child spouting like the ideology that you hate. If you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's something really horrible about that, because it feels in some way like if it's an ideology that you hate, it feels like it's a corruption in some way.
Yeah.
And it feels like, and obviously they are, if we're thinking in utopian terms, we tend to be thinking in broader terms, like about long periods of time, like futures, how are things going to develop. And obviously children are always key to that, because they are coming into the future. Yes, they're creating the future. So yeah, I guess there's something there. Why quite the great ones would be interested in it, being as they kind of exist on a different plane, I don't know. But yes, I think there's something in dystopian, in the dystopian system, the idea that it would hold sway over the children is very important. And it feels like once you've got this isn't always the case, but we also have the idea that you need to get to whatever it's about. We need to get this idea in the children quickly, because then once it's in them, it's like it's set, and then that's how things will be. If you see what I mean.
Absolutely. And I found in my research and just in general, I think we can all recognise the idea of people being very concerned about what their children are learning at schools, particularly, as you say, where this is associated with cultural division, for instance. But yeah, certainly Christians I worked with, very concerned. And you see, obviously, in America, where homeschooling is such a movement, because people are tremendously concerned that their children are being taught within a system that they think is wrong. I mean, a lot of the people I worked with would essentially describe the system of secular education and politics and what's referred to as the world in general as being a dystopia, basically. So the idea of children being educated within that was tremendously concerning for people.
The way I was very pleased to try, to take the podcast in a different direction away from the secular thing, but I always have to bring it back to systems, because I can't help myself. But it made me think about this, as you said, this suggestion that children maybe are being used to create more blood. Just made you think of systems, the way they tend to have to feed themselves. Like the idea of the whole idea of blood administration system is that you're able to heal people, so you're able to like heal your community and make everyone healthy. But then in order to do that, it's taking children and harvesting them for blood, which kind of defeats the purpose of the first place. If your idea is to heal your community, then you're killing your community to do it. And I think systems often have this characteristic of doing what they need to do to keep functioning, regardless of whether the stated goals are being met. If you see what I mean, they need to just keep themselves going, and they tend to find ways to do that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it actually fits really nicely with the idea of the world within Yharnam, which is, as you say, kind of eating itself, ends up consuming its own blood, and perhaps this the idea that it all first begins as they're digging out the ruins underneath the city. It's like digging too deep in your own foundation or something, and the whole world ends up collapsing in on itself.
There was as well the whole, because when you start the game, and you have these like mobs of, like I said, like half transformed people, you get the impression that they're looking for monsters, like they're out hunting. I think they shout stuff at you, like
yes.
They're shouting about like foul beasts and stuff, but they don't realise that they are transformed beasts. So again, the cyclical thing, you've got like these transformed beasts out hunting for beasts in the streets, and like it's a very fits into that theme again.
I love it. I love it so much. It's something that I really enjoy in Dark Souls as well. Just the idea, which has a similar kind of thing in a fantasy setting, I guess. But the idea that there's these patrolmen wandering around, still keeping their patrols against these terrible, monsters, without realizing that slowly they've been becoming the monsters themselves, but they're still holding their patrol, they're still guarding against all newcomers. There's something so wonderfully bleak about it. This is a world that's just deranged, a world that's gone mad, and something enjoyable, although very depressing in that.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that we've in terms of thinking about systems, I think of a reading you could make is one that's often can be applied to like vampire fiction.
Oh yeah.
Where some people have thought about. There's very obviously many interpretations of what vampires mean. People can listen to Shadow Trap and discover some of that stuff. But,
they absolutely could, yeah.
Yeah. But one of the readings you get is that vampire fiction is about capital.
Right.
And, this idea of a powerful person sucking the blood out of you. Blood has this kind of, potentially has this kind of symbolism to it. And I don't know that I've got anything particularly perceptive to say about it, but I think you can apply that reading to Bloodborne because, like we said, the whole city is, the city's whole power depends on blood. It's the whole economy. Like I said, they don't use alcohol because blood's more intoxicating. Characters offer you their blood at various points. It's like this thing that you exchange. Yeah. And again, this whole thing of it is a system. It becomes, it just continues to circulate. The blood is required to heal people, and it takes the blood from the people to feed itself and to keep the church's power going. Even to this point where there's a suggestion that they start going out killing people killing people who have fallen to this disease, but also people they think might be falling to this disease.
Yeah.
Again, it's just this sense that the system's become completely broken down, but because it wants to keep going, it keeps sucking the blood out of us and killing us to keep itself going, keep the power there.
Yeah, absolutely. And those transfusions, you've just got to keep pumping that foreign blood into yourself for as long as possible in the city of Yharnam. Keep it circulating. Take it from children. Take it from wherever gods. Take it from wherever you can get it, and stuff yourself with it until you go completely mad, and then you go and get some more. Yeah.
Okay. Another difficult question, I think, which I would struggle to answer, so it's a bit cruel of me to ask, but. So this, at the end of Bloodborne, we kind of get to a point where whenever we slay a boss, we get, it says "Prey slaughtered" is a message that comes up on the screen. And it's this whole idea in Bloodborne, which we haven't discussed, because again, the story is very complex. And there's a whole suggestion of there being like an alternate reality created. And when we complete the game, we kill the last boss, we get this message that says we have slayed the nightmare. It's again very vague. I don't know what that means. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on what we're supposed to take from the end of Bloodborne.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? There's several endings to Bloodborne.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, and I've only seen one of them. There's an ending you can take a bit earlier on where you sort of kill the last boss, what appears to be the last boss, and then you sort of get the option, do you want to wake up now? And I always just go, yes, I'd love to wake up now.
That's what I did as well.
Yeah. I've had quite enough of this, thank you very much. But then if you go on and you kill some more bosses, you kind of can get to this ending where, which I've only seen in YouTube videos, obviously, where you can... the implication is that, okay, you've defeated the last god, you've kind of completely peeled back the veil of reality, you've seen the old gods for what they are, and you've destroyed this very powerful old god, and perhaps now you have ascended and you have become one of the old gods, and now this is all your realm and you're sort of in charge. It's quite a typical Dark Souls move that kind of happens in the Dark Souls series as well, possibly, if we're reading the ending correctly. I quite like it. It's this feeling, again, it's that hopelessness, and I think that is something about the aesthetic of Dark Souls and Bloodborne that I really, really enjoy. Just being able to wallow in this very bleak world, and you think, oh well, maybe I'll change it, maybe it will get better. And then when you finally beat the final boss, it's like, well, you're in charge now. And I always feel like you're usurping rather than destroying the system. You know, you're just going to become the new big boss. You're just going to become the new most powerful thing in that reality. But the cycle will continue. To me, I think there's it pairs really nicely with the gameplay mechanic. You know, you've got this feeling of this tremendous victory, this tremendous self-efficacy. I can get better at this game. I can beat these bosses. I can move forward and progress. But, you know, all the time the game is saying to you, can you actually change anything? Perhaps you really can't. Perhaps this world is just going through cycles and you were just inevitably going to come along at some point and start the cycle again.
Yeah, and even if you get that ending that you talked about where you like kind of defeat the final god and like become you're like this little wiggly slug thing. It's very like, do you know what I mean? It's not like, oh look, now you're this massive powerful god with claw. You're like a little wiggly slug that another character picks up and you're just kind of writhing there. It feels very, it's not like feels like it's trying to kind of undercut your sense of victory in some way. And again, absolutely. Like you said, this hopelessness kind of say, oh, okay, well done, you're a little slug thing now.
Yeah, what does that even mean? Is that good? Who knows? Yeah, it's just wonderful.
But I think this is, so I think this game raises a lot of interesting stuff in terms of thinking about, you know, stuff we've talked about in terms of the utopian aspects of religion or God of religious thought. But to me, I think because of what you're saying, I do kind of think of it as being anti-utopian in some sense. Because, right, like you said, it has this idea of, and all the Souls games have this, I think, this, like you said, a sense of a cycle that can't be broken. It feels like, yeah, to me, for that, they're very kind of anti-utopian in the sense that you don't really have any agency to make things better and things just kind of go on as they are.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about it from a theological point of view, you know. It's a way that theology has been contrasted with anthropology, with my discipline, is that anthropology is very good at imagining that the world might be different somewhere else, you know, in a foreign country, you know, the culture next door might be very different to your own, but it struggles to imagine differences taking place here. It struggles to imagine change happening. And the Souls games have a similar kind of thing. You know, they question whether change is really possible. So if it has a sort of theology to it, I would say it's a very bleak theology. It's a world that's sort of completely deprived of hope in some ways.
Yeah. As you said, it's always easier to imagine a different place somewhere else, yes, rather than change here. That's something that's always kind of a struggle for utopians, I suppose. So yeah, I think fits very nicely in that. Thank you very much for talking to me, Rosie. It's been fun to chat about Bloodborne.
Absolutely.
Touch on a kind of different approach to Utopia than I normally do. So thank you very much for that.
Oh, thank you for having me on.
Where should people go if they would like to find the Shadow Trap and Diane and so on?
You can find Diane on Twitter at Diane Podcast, and the Shadow Trap is Shadow Trap HQ on Twitter. Both shows available in all podcast listening destinations that I can think of.
Cool. Okay, thank you. So that's the end of my conversation with Rosie. Thank you, as always, for listening. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to hear more, there are bonus episodes of the podcast available on patreon.com/Utopian Horizons. You can find there episodes about conspiracy theory, Utopia music. There's a couple on some TV shows. There's one on a video game. And there'll probably be, I'm thinking of doing another video game for the next one, actually, or at least in the near future. So, if you're interested in hearing some of that stuff, if you go to patreon.com/Utopian Horizons, then you can get access to that there. Your support would also be very much appreciated in terms of reviews on iTunes or whatever you listen to this on. That is a real big help. So if you could take a moment to give me a review if you've been listening to the podcast for a while and you've been enjoying it, that would just help more people to see the podcast and hopefully help it to keep growing. If you want to get in touch with me, you can email me on utopianhorizonspod@gmail.com. You can tweet me at Utopian Horizons. You can send me a message on facebook.com/Utopian Horizons. There's also a Discord channel if you want to join that. And you can, if you just go to the Twitter, Utopian Horizons, it's in the pinned tweet if you wanted to join that as well. As I always say, I will be back as soon as I can. I've got lots of guests primed to come on and lots of ideas and plans for stuff I want to cover in the coming months. So, thanks for listening, and I'll see you again soon. Bye. 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 Bye.